Why do we believe what we believe? The invisible architecture of belief. Every belief you hold feels like your own. You have opinions about success, happiness, morality, politics, religion, relationships, and even the kind of person you believe yourself to be. These beliefs feel obvious, almost as though they were discovered through reason and personal experience. They shape the decisions you make, the people you trust, and the way you interpret the world around you. But what if many of your deepest beliefs were shaping your mind long before you were ever capable of questioning them? From the moment we enter the world, our minds begin constructing an internal map of reality. Before we can speak, we are already learning. We observe how our parents treat one another. We notice what brings praise and what brings punishment. We absorb the values of our family, the traditions of our culture, the teachings of our schools, and the beliefs of our communities. Every conversation, every experience, every triumph, and every disappointment quietly contributes to the framework through which we will eventually understand the world. As children, we rarely ask whether these ideas are true, we simply accept them. The people raising us become our first teachers, and because we depend on them for survival, we naturally trust their understanding of reality. Over time, these lessons become so familiar that we no longer recognize them as beliefs. They simply become the way things are. What began as ideas gradually becomes common sense, and common sense eventually becomes our reality. Imagine two children born on the very same day, but on opposite sides of the world. One is raised believing that individual freedom is life's highest ideal. The other is taught that serving the community comes first. One grows up in a deeply religious home where faith provides the foundation for understanding the universe. The other is raised in an environment where science is regarded as the primary path to truth. Both children receive love, both are intelligent, both grow into thoughtful adults. Yet many of their deepest convictions were quietly formed years before they possessed the ability to examine them. Had they exchanged places at birth, many of those convictions would likely have been entirely different. This realization has fascinated philosophers for centuries. The English philosopher John Locke argued that the human mind begins as a blank slate, gradually written upon by experience. We are not born believing in democracy or monarchy, capitalism or socialism, one religion or another. These ideas develop through countless interactions with the people and environments that surround us. Experience becomes the author of belief long before reason begins to edit the story. Plato explored this mystery through one of philosophy's greatest metaphors, the allegory of the cave. In his story, prisoners spend their entire lives watching shadows cast upon a wall. Having never seen the outside world, they mistake those shadows for reality itself. The lesson reaches far beyond ancient Greece. Human beings naturally accept the world they inherit. Until we encounter another perspective, we rarely imagine that our understanding may be incomplete. The cave is not merely a prison of stone. It is a prison of unquestioned assumptions. Modern psychology has reinforced many of these ancient insights. Researchers have shown that children begin forming lasting beliefs about themselves and the world at an astonishingly young age. A child who is consistently encouraged often develops confidence that carries into adulthood. A child repeatedly criticized may grow up believing they are fundamentally inadequate, even when every objective measure suggests otherwise. These beliefs become internal narratives, shaping future choices, relationships, and opportunities. What begins as another person's voice slowly becomes our own. Psychologists also recognize the profound influence of social learning. We imitate the behaviors, attitudes, and values of those around us, often without conscious awareness. Families pass down traditions, cultures pass down customs, schools transmit knowledge, media shapes expectations, friends reinforce group identity. By adulthood, our beliefs have been influenced by thousands of invisible experiences, many of which we can no longer remember, yet their influence remains. Beliefs do far more than determine our opinions. They shape what we notice, what we ignore, whom we trust, what we fear, and what we hope for. They influence the questions we ask and the answers we are willing to accept. Two people can witness the same event, and arrive at completely different conclusions because each is interpreting reality through a different framework of assumptions. The event remains the same, the meaning changes. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about belief is that we usually inherit it before we ever examine it. We spend the earliest years of life absorbing ideas from those we trust most, rarely stopping to ask whether those ideas accurately reflect reality. Only later, through education, experience, travel, philosophy, or personal hardship, do many people begin questioning the foundations upon which their worldview has been built. This does not mean our inherited beliefs are necessarily false. Many contain profound wisdom accumulated over generations. They preserve culture, provide moral guidance, and help us navigate an extraordinarily complex world. But history also reminds us that every civilization has believed things that were later abandoned. Every generation has challenged ideas once thought unquestionable. Human understanding evolves because courageous people become willing to examine what everyone else accepts without question. Perhaps that is where the search for truth truly begins. Not by collecting more beliefs, but by becoming aware of the beliefs we already carry. For the greatest obstacle to understanding reality may not be ignorance. It may be the invisible architecture of belief through which we have been seeing the world all along. Why we defend our beliefs. If many of our beliefs are shaped by family, culture, education, and experience, another question naturally follows. Why do we defend them so fiercely? Most of us think of beliefs as simple opinions, ideas we hold because we have carefully examined the evidence. But psychology tells a different story. Over time, our beliefs become woven into our identity. They influence how we see ourselves, where we belong, whom we trust, and how we make sense of the world. When a deeply held belief is challenged, it rarely feels like an intellectual disagreement. It feels personal. To question the belief is, in some sense, to question the person who holds it. The ancient Greek philosopher Socrates understood this better than almost anyone. He spent his life asking simple but penetrating questions. Rather than telling people what to think, he encouraged them to examine the assumptions they had accepted without question. Why do you believe this? How do you know it is true? Could you be mistaken? His method often exposed contradictions that people had never noticed before. Some welcomed the opportunity to think more deeply. Others became defensive, angry, or hostile. In the end, Socrates was sentenced to death by the city of Athens. His life became a powerful reminder that people often resist uncomfortable questions more fiercely than comfortable illusions. Modern psychology helps explain why. Researchers have discovered that the human mind naturally seeks consistency. Once we adopt a belief, our brains begin looking for evidence that confirms it while quietly overlooking information that challenges it. This tendency, known as confirmation bias, affects every one of us. It shapes the news we consume, the conversations we remember, and even the facts we consider trustworthy. Without realizing it, we often become skilled at defending what we already believe instead of honestly investigating whether it is true. Another powerful force is something psychologists call cognitive dissonance. This is the mental discomfort we experience when reality conflicts with our existing beliefs or behaviors. Imagine someone who believes they are an honest person but discovers they have acted unfairly. Rather than changing their view of themselves, they may justify their actions or reinterpret what happened. The mind often protects its existing worldview because rebuilding it requires effort, humility, and the willingness to admit we may have been wrong. The Swiss psychologist Carl Jung believed that much of our thinking is influenced by forces operating beneath conscious awareness. Hidden fears, emotional wounds, childhood experiences, and unconscious desires quietly shape the conclusions we reach. We often imagine that reason sits behind the steering wheel of the mind, carefully guiding every decision. Yet research increasingly suggests that emotions frequently arrive first, with reason following afterward to explain why we believe we were right all along. The Buddha recognized this pattern more than 2,000 years before modern psychology. He taught that attachment is one of the primary causes of human suffering. Most people think of attachment as clinging to possessions or relationships, But the Buddha also warned against attachment to ideas. We cling to opinions, identities, beliefs, and worldviews because they provide a sense of certainty. When someone challenges those beliefs, we feel as though something essential has been threatened. The stronger our attachment, the more difficult it becomes to see reality clearly. Evolutionary psychology offers another fascinating perspective. For hundreds of thousands of years, survival depended upon belonging to a tribe. Acceptance meant protection, cooperation, and access to food. Rejection could mean isolation or death. As a result, the human brain evolved to value agreement with the group. Even today, many of our beliefs are reinforced not because they have been carefully examined, but because they strengthen our sense of belonging. We often inherit the opinions of our family, our friends, our religion, or our political community because shared beliefs create social bonds. In many situations, fitting in feels safer than standing apart. We see this tendency everywhere. Families divide over politics. Friends argue over religion. Entire nations become polarized over competing visions of reality. Social media has amplified this problem by surrounding us with people who already think like we do. Algorithms learn our preferences and feed us information that confirms our existing worldview. Over time, our beliefs become increasingly reinforced, while opposing perspectives slowly disappear from view. We begin living inside carefully constructed echo chambers, convinced that our understanding of reality is the only reasonable one. History repeatedly reminds us that certainty is not the same as truth. Nearly every major breakthrough in human knowledge challenged ideas that were once considered unquestionable. Copernicus challenged the belief that Earth stood at the center of the universe. Galileo defended observations that many refused to accept. Charles Darwin transformed biology by proposing evolution through natural selection. These ideas were controversial not because evidence was lacking, but because they threatened beliefs people had long considered certain. The same pattern unfolds within our own lives. We often defend beliefs about ourselves with equal determination. We tell ourselves we are not intelligent enough, not worthy enough, too old, too broken, or incapable of changing. These stories become so familiar that we stop recognizing them as beliefs. They begin to feel like objective reality, yet many of the limits we accept are not imposed by the world around us. They are sustained by the narratives we continue telling ourselves. Perhaps this is why the search for truth requires more than intelligence. It requires humility, the willingness to question our assumptions, the courage to change our minds, and the wisdom to recognize that no belief, no matter how deeply held, should be beyond honest examination. For the greatest obstacle to discovering the truth may not be ignorance. It may be our unwillingness to let go of the beliefs that have quietly become part of who we think we are. Choosing what you believe. If our beliefs are shaped by family, culture, education, experience, and the communities around us, does that mean we are simply products of our conditioning? Are we destined to spend our lives repeating ideas that were handed to us by others, never stopping to ask whether they are actually true? Fortunately, the answer is no. One of the greatest abilities human beings possess is the capacity to examine their own minds. We can step back from our thoughts, question our assumptions, and choose whether the beliefs we inherited deserve a place in our lives. This ability to reflect upon our own thinking is one of the defining characteristics of philosophy, science, and genuine wisdom. The search for truth begins the moment we become willing to question ourselves. For Socrates, this was the foundation of philosophy. He believed that wisdom was not measured by how much a person knew, but by their willingness to continually examine what they believed to be true. Rather than filling the mind with more information, he taught people to ask better questions. Why do I believe this? How do I know it is true? What evidence supports it? Could I be mistaken? These questions remain just as powerful today as they were more than 2,000 years ago, because they force us to separate knowledge from assumption. Centuries later, René Descartes adopted an even more radical approach. He decided to doubt everything that could possibly be doubted. His purpose was not to become cynical, but to discover a foundation of knowledge that could not be shaken. By questioning every inherited belief, every assumption, and every appearance, Descartes hoped to arrive at something absolutely certain. His method reminds us that questioning our beliefs is not an act of destruction, it is an act of refinement. Weak ideas collapse under examination. Strong ideas become even stronger. The Buddha approached the problem through direct observation rather than debate. Instead of arguing endlessly about competing philosophies, he encouraged people to observe their own minds. Watch your thoughts arise. Notice how emotions influence your judgments. Pay attention to how attachment, fear, pride, and desire shape your perception of the world. The more clearly we understand the mind, the less likely we are to become imprisoned by it. A thought is not necessarily true simply because it appears in consciousness. A belief is not necessarily accurate simply because we have held it for many years. Laozi offered another profound insight. He observed that much of human confusion comes from clinging too tightly to fixed ideas about ourselves and the world. Reality is constantly changing, yet we desperately seek certainty. We become attached to labels, identities, and rigid opinions, believing they provide security. But the more tightly we cling to certainty, the less capable we become of seeing life as it truly is. Sometimes wisdom requires not adding another belief, but letting go of one that no longer reflects reality. Modern psychology reaches many of the same conclusions. Researchers studying cognitive biases have demonstrated that every human being interprets the world through mental shortcuts and unconscious assumptions. No one is completely objective. Our memories are imperfect. Our emotions influence our reasoning. Our expectations shape what we notice and what we overlook. The goal is not to eliminate bias entirely. That may be impossible. The goal is to become aware of it. Awareness allows us to pause, reflect, and ask whether our conclusions are based upon evidence or merely upon habit. Science itself is built upon this principle. A scientist does not become attached to a theory simply because it is familiar. Every hypothesis must be tested against reality. If new evidence appears, the theory changes. Science progresses because it values truth more than certainty. Perhaps we should approach our own beliefs with the same humility. Instead of asking, "How can I prove that I am right?" we might ask, "What evidence would convince me that I am wrong?" That single question has transformed entire fields of knowledge. This way of thinking can change everyday life. Read books that challenge your perspective instead of only confirming it. Listen carefully to people who disagree with you before deciding they are mistaken. Question the stories you tell yourself about your abilities, your limitations, and your future. Learn to distinguish facts from interpretations and evidence from assumptions. Most importantly, become comfortable saying the 3 words that every honest thinker eventually learns to appreciate. "I don't know." Those words are not a sign of ignorance. They are the beginning of wisdom. The people who grow the most are rarely those who believe they already possess every answer. They are the ones who remain curious enough to continue asking questions long after others have settled for certainty. This does not mean abandoning every belief or living in endless doubt. Some beliefs become stronger the more deeply they are examined. Others quietly fall away because they were never built upon solid foundations. The purpose of questioning is not to destroy belief. It is to discover which beliefs are worthy of keeping. Perhaps true freedom is not the freedom to believe whatever we want. Perhaps true freedom is the courage to examine the beliefs we have inherited, the humility to change our minds when the evidence demands it, and the wisdom to spend a lifetime pursuing truth rather than defending certainty. For the greatest discoveries in life rarely begin with an answer, they begin with a question. And the most important question any of us can ask is the one Socrates posed more than 2,000 years ago. How do I know that what I believe is true?